Thousands of fuel rods packed with uranium pellets powered San Onofre and generated electricity for Southern California for 45 years. That spent fuel will remain radioactive for tens of thousands of years. Southern California Edison already has 50 casks full of spent fuel stored on site. Next to those storage units, there was an empty space beside a seawall with ocean waves lapping on the other side. Edison decided this space was its only option to store the next 75 casks, since the federal government has failed to find a long-term storage site for nuclear waste anywhere else in the country. In January, that space started filling up. Admiral Len Herring, who headed up Navy Region Southwest before his retirement, is one of many voices calling for the decision to be reconsidered.
But I believe that cost was a driving factor, expediency was a driving factor, and the associated risks that are now being identified by the group of individuals that I'm currently working with, I think are much more grave than what was put in that assessment.
Herring says the Nuclear Regulatory Commission may have given the go-ahead, but another federal agency, the Department of Defense, should consider the national security risks. He's looking ahead and says before the ocean comes over the seawall, sea level rise could compromise the bottom of the canisters holding the waste. They're buried just above the water table.
As sea level rises, the containers are subjected to elements that they simply are not designed to handle.
Transferring the fuel from cooling ponds and into dry cask storage is being done meticulously. It takes several days to get one giant canister loaded with 37 fuel assemblies and moved the few hundred feet from the fuel pools to the storage site. Herring wants the Navy to consider moving the waste to another spot on Camp Pendleton on the other side of the freeway, where it would be on higher ground. So far, the Marine Corps has rejected the idea. The next closest alternative being proposed is to store the waste in another nuclear power plant, about 350 miles east in Arizona, where Edison has part ownership at Palo Verde. Attorney Mike Aguirre, who has sued Edison over the decommissioning plan, believes this is the best bet.
No one wants to have nuclear waste necessarily move in their community, but we do have a shot at Palo Verde because they're already storing nuclear waste for California there.
Edison has asked and been turned down by Palo Verde, but Aguirre believes they should try again. The third option comes from the private sector, which is eager to tap into billions of dollars the federal government's collected for nuclear waste storage. But that money was designated for long-term storage at Yucca Mountain, and the government does not want to release it for interim storage. David Victor is chair of Edison's Community Engagement Panel, a group that meets quarterly to review what's going on at San Onofre.
And I would say that there is a gap opening between what the private sector is willing and able to do in this area and what the government needs to do in terms of changing federal law.
Two companies are now applying for licenses to build interim storage sites, one in West Texas and one in eastern New Mexico. John Heaton is chair of the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance in New Mexico.
We think that the reality is if Congress sees that a facility is in fact licensed and ready to operate, it may change their mind.
San Onofre is in the 49th Congressional District. Congressman Darrell Issa says finding an alternative site for the waste is one of his top priorities.
It's so easy for people to say no to a solution but not have an alternative. And in this case, people can feel that a particular site is not good, but if it's incrementally better than where this waste is today, then it has to be considered.
But Issa is stepping down, and Congress is distracted this year by elections, so there's little hope new legislation on nuclear waste will be passed in the House. The Senate doesn't even have a bill in the works yet. Meanwhile, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has changed the rules for how long nuclear waste can be stored on site, without changing the requirements for storing nuclear waste. Ray Lutz of the group Citizens Oversight has petitioned the NRC to require thicker double-walled canisters.
The key question is, we have canisters that have a design life of 40 years, and yet the Waste Confidence Report, the one they recently put out, says that these will remain on site indefinitely, and that's okay. Indefinitely is not 40 years.
Herring says the community must act soon because Edison's plan threatens future generations.
The people who have made the decision won't be around to deal with it. But unfortunately, there are folks like myself who I'm not focusing on myself anymore. I'm focusing on my grandchildren. And are we making decisions that are right for them?
Herring says while there may not be an issue for the next few years, there are no guarantees the storage containers won't be compromised by sea level rise or other threats that will put San Diego's inhabitants at risk. Alison St. John, KPBS News.